So you're renting a home, a apartment, whatever the case is, and you need to get renter's insurance. So you're trying to figure out, like, what is the benefit to this? Why do I even need a renter's policy? It's also known as something called a liability policy. So we're going to dive in and explain today what is a renter's insurance for and what does renter's insurance cover. Hey guys, Mark with Think Insurance. Let's dive right into this question because there's a few pieces, and this should be a fairly short video because there's not a whole lot different between if you've ever seen a home insurance policy versus a renter's insurance policy. The main difference between the two is you don't own the building, so you're not responsible for what they call coverage A, which is the dwelling, and B, which is the other structures. So essentially you're buying what's called a liability policy. And the biggest point of a renter's policy, especially if a landlord's on your back saying, you gotta get a renter's policy, otherwise you can't live here, is because if something happens in your apartment, house, wherever you're living at the time, and it's your fault, but they can't prove it, then the landlord is going to be sued. And he doesn't want to be sued. You should be the one that gets sued in their eyes. And so essentially what happens is you buy liability. Typically, a lot of agents just go cheap and a lot of people go cheap and they'll buy $100,000 liability. In some cases that is enough, but it's kind of a barrier to entry. The cost of bumping it up to the higher limit, which is most common in my agency that I work with, is $500,000. So if you're looking for that renter's policy that includes that liability, I normally recommend $500,000 just in case. The part that a lot of people don't realize is that liability carries outside of the place that you live. So if you're on vacation, something's happening and you make a mistake and someone gets affected, whether you drop an Alka-Seltzer in the monkey cage at the zoo just randomly, monkey eats it, dies, you're liable for paying for that new monkey, which could cost $1 million. Getting them flown in, it's some Tibet monkey, I don't know, whatever the case is, it's got gold on its fingertips. So it's $1 million monkey and you're liable for that. Your liability will protect you in those situations. The next part is your property damage, the PD. And that's the part most people don't care about because it usually comes with $10,000 or more. We typically do 30 on average because the most common person has about $30,000 if you were to add up the cost of your clothes, your shoes, anything that you own, your TV, your couch. It may not seem like a lot and you may have got it at a garage sale. It might be cheap, but the value of replacing those to buy it brand new is a lot higher than you think. So if you have a certain number of rooms, the easiest way to determine that is figure about $5,000 per room. So you've got a living room, 2-bedroom, and a kitchen. So you've got about $20,000 worth of stuff that you should protect. Now that's not an exact science, so you'll have to determine your own value. This is edutainment, so I can't tell you exactly what you should carry, but I would seek out advice from an advisor. This is what I commonly see, and when I say commonly, I would say almost 9 out of 10 people go with these limits. The next part of a renter's policy is going to be any living expenses. Living expenses are essentially if the building burnt down and you had to get moved out of the building or something happened and you're out of it. You can't instantly come up with rent for that in another place. So this policy is going to kick in and they're going to pay for you to rent another location in the time being. Most commonly, you're going to see anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 for the living expenses. It essentially is to get you a few months because if you're renting and the place is inhabitable for 3 months, you're not going to stay there. You're just going to go rent somewhere else. You're going to be allowed likely out of the lease or you just break the lease and move on to something else. And then you're in a different situation. But if you plan on going back and it only takes a month or 2 months, it could be 3 months, who knows? Whatever the case is, your insurance is gonna kick in those funds to pay for you to be living somewhere else. It also pays for that emergency. Let's say there was a fire and you had to go to a hotel for 3 weeks. You now have to go to McDonald's, you gotta go out to eat all the time, you used to mow the lawn, whatever the case was, if it was a home, you now have expenses that you're paying for, and that's living expenses. So because of the occurrence that happened, as long as it's a covered peril, it's an incident that was part of the policy, typically fire is the most common, but as long as that's covered, then you have whatever your limit there is, and you can still survive without having to out-pocket money that you didn't plan on month to month. And that's essentially what a renter's policy is. That doesn't go into some of the specifics, so if you are a little bit higher end of a renter and you're looking for a little bit more in a policy, you can add in certain endorsements. So if you have special watches, special jewelry that you want to protect in addition to the standard coverage, then you can increase those. Just keep in mind a few things that you want to know about your policy. Number one, you have a deductible. Most commonly, it's anywhere from 0 to 500. You can pick anywhere from 100, 250, 500. Obviously, the higher it goes, the more you out pocket in a claim and the less you pay monthly in the insurance. Honestly, it's so cheap already. You're typically going to be somewhere around anywhere from $15 to $40 per month. Typically, in most states that I've seen, is about $20-ish. So $18 to $20 is most common, depending on the limits that you choose and the location that you're in. The second piece that you should be aware of is if you have car insurance, I would always go to them first to find out what it would be to add your renters on top of it. Because in most cases, the place that holds your car insurance will give you 15 to a 20% discount on your auto just for adding a renter's policy. So essentially, it technically could be free. You might even save money overall by adding a basic renter's policy onto that. And the third thing that you should remember is if you're dealing with the landlord, get a copy of what they're looking for. Essentially 9 times out of 10, the only thing that the landlord is asking you for is the liability portion. And if you know it's $100,000 or $300,000, whatever the case is, just make sure when you purchase the policy that you have those limits. Commonly, I'll tell you up front, the limits that I typically see, like I mentioned throughout the video, is $500,000 liability, $20,000 to $30,000 worth of personal property, $5,000-ish or more on personal living expenses, and that's it. Most likely people will do a $250 or a $500 deductible. I usually do $500 if the person doesn't care and probably never plans to file a claim. Otherwise, I do a little bit lower deductible so it's less out of pocket if something were to happen. And the fourth piece is what we mentioned at the end of the video is extended jewelry, watches, anything that you have. Just know that there's limits to the initial policy. So when you say I'm gonna have $30,000 worth of personal property, that may not be covering all of your jewelry because there's usually a limit to jewelry, and most commonly it's $1,500. So look at the actual policy that you're going through because it could be different, but if you have more than the set limit for those items, if you have special watches, special furs, anything like that, you may need to increase those limits on those specific items. You can do what's called a blanket coverage or an endorsement, and those are two different ways that you can determine what you need. I also did a video right here where you guys can watch what the blanket versus endorsement actually is. If you want to go into depth with that, feel free. Otherwise, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, turn the bell icon on for more future advice. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. That helps me the most. Otherwise, I'm Mark with Think Insurance. I'll see you in the next one.